Hey everyone and welcome to another video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Liking the video helps out immensely. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. We are very close to hitting 135,000. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax. Enjoy the 2 hours of horror stories with no mid-roll ads, except for the ad break after this intro. There will not be any more ad breaks after that one. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. Another day, another job. It would be nice to find something more reliable one day. Ideally, with a low mortality rate and paid time off. Jake and I have made our way through so many career fields that I can barely keep track at this point. We have been crime scene cleaners, construction workers, bartenders, and hell, even one-time amateur exorcists. Don't ask about that one. Though, I will say the papacy might forgive our transgressions if they saw our results. Anyway, Jake and I have found ourselves in need of work again. This last job didn't last long and it was strange even by our standards. It was another cleaning gig. And we figured that despite the odd description and the admittedly creepy location of an abandoned building near town, it would be all right. At least there would be no blood and bodies to clean up and hopefully no cursed dolls hiding around in the basement either. It was a month ago. We were looking around and found an odd listing about a cleaning crew needed for an old flea market close to downtown. Just some cover-up painting. Not a big deal considering what we had done before, and the pay was surprisingly good for such a simple job. We jumped at the chance when we found it since it would be the first decent payday in a while. Jake and I took the van out to the building to meet the contact for the position. Jake was grinning like he always did when we were going to a new job. At this point, I figured he got some sort of masochistic joy out of the idea that everything might unravel around us like a curse. I was just excited for another paycheck, even if it was another cleaning gig. "Come on, man. I'm sure this one will be on the level," Jake said, trying to cheer me up while frantically switching through songs on his playlist. He finally settled on Battery by Metallica, and before he cranked the volume up, he continued, "After all, what's the worst? Don't finish that sentence." I snapped back at him, but he just shrugged and drowned out my concern with the song. We rode on for a while longer, seeing the telltale signs of dilapidated buildings which assured us we were getting close. Jake checked the directions again. "This is it up ahead. Old Mayhew's flea market. I'm shocked this place closed. Who could pass up on such fine offerings?" He chuckled sarcastically while pointing to an old defaced sign of an unpleasant-looking man in an ill-fitting suit. Jake had a point. The marketing sucked as much as the location. We parked in a lot just outside the condemned building. Now that we were closer, I saw that the place was fairly large, which made sense if it had been a bigger market in the past. The entire building was in a sorry state now. Many windows were broken. Boards were haphazardly nailed over sections, and the whole place looked like a light breeze could topple it. As I looked on, I saw nearly every square inch of the place was tagged or covered in graffiti. There was also a strange ring of what looked like white paint on the ground that seemed to circle the perimeter. I wondered why someone would want us to clean the place and not just tear it down and start again somewhere better. But I suppose it didn't matter. We were there and ready to work. Assuming this job really was on the level, I wanted to get down to it as soon as possible. In the next few minutes, another car pulled up. It was a well-maintained, if not a little dated old mobile, still looking sharp despite its best years being behind it. A tall man wearing a cowboy hat stepped out of the car and walked over to us. "Howdy, boys. The name's Earl Mayhew. Good to meet you." Jake stepped forward and immediately shook the man's hand and gave a sarcastic, "Howdy, Earl. Name's Jake and this here is my friend." I cringed at the awful accent Jake was attempting and hoped it would not offend our new client. Instead, Mr. Mayhew just laughed and slapped his knee. I held out my hand and before I could say anything, Mr. Mayhew walked past me and towards the building. "Well then, now that the introductions are out of the way, please follow me. I can show you the place, and you fellas can decide if y'all are interested in the job." He moved on towards the building. We shrugged and followed. Mayhew rummaged through his pocket for a moment and produced a key that he used to open a large padlock on the front door. Before stepping inside, he peeked in and looked around as if expecting something. Then he finally moved in and gestured for us to follow. I know she doesn't look like much these days, but we had a lot of good times. I just can't bear the idea of selling the place. This used to be one of the most successful flea markets in the county. We had people from all over the state with hundreds of vendors and clients. That was then. Mayhew sighed woefully and looked like he had forgotten we were there for a moment. He snapped back to the present and regarded us. Sorry, boys, lots of memories. Anyway, come this way and I'll show you the real meat and potatoes of what I need done. We followed him down a dimly lit hole and into a wide-open central plaza that was covered in debris. Almost every surface was plastered with some measure of graffiti. Definitely a fixer-upper, Jake mumbled. Mayhew must have heard him, and his eyes narrowed. Jake caught himself and blurted out apologetically, "But it has good bones, good character. No wonder you wanted to preserve it." Mayhew nodded and continued on. Jake shot me a lame thumbs up and I rolled my eyes. We stopped again and Mayhew looked around, examining particular walls and parts of the floor with care. I was about to ask what he was looking for when he held up a hand and then pointed at a spot on the wall. "There, right there. That is what I need you gentlemen to take care of." I looked at the odd spots on the wall and was confused. "What is that?" I asked, unable to hide my confusion. "That is what you will need to clean. This place has been turned over recently, believe it or not. I even have a crew working nights out here. No matter how much we cover it, it comes back. I need you two to cover it up before." He paused, looking nervous. "Before what?" Jake said. "Before it changes," Mayhew finished, and we both looked at him incredulously. "Changes," I tried to clarify. "Yes, I know it sounds crazy, but this art, if you can call it that, can change. It spreads all the time, slow and steady, Ike. If it's not cleaned up, it eventually transforms. When the images start forming, Mayhew pause, and it looked like he was trying to suppress an involuntary shudder. Well, it's best not to let it come to that. We have had some incidents before when it did." I didn't like the way he said incident. "But it won't be an issue if you are thorough. I just need you fellas to handle the paint. It has to be paint that covers it and not any cheap paint. It seems as long as we use decent stuff, it holds it off longer. We tried throwing paint thinner at it in case it might work to wear it down faster. Unfortunately, it wouldn't stop the spread. So I was left with gallons of the stuff that I had to store in the main hall. Once I get the funds ready, I am going to wallpaper the bejesus out of this place and replace all the flooring and see how that thing likes it." He slapped his knee and laughed again, but stopped to cough awkwardly. I was confused. What was that thing he was referring to? It felt like there was a detail he was admitting. Mayhew straightened his jacket and continued. "So, fellas, what will it be? Just a few weeks of painting and I'm willing to pay you the whole salary of the last crew of 5 people. He held out a piece of paper and I collected it before Jake could. He looked over my shoulder and mumbled a soft woe when he saw the pay. I tried to suppress my own excitement. It was double what we made on our last job for only a couple of weeks of work. "Count us in, sir," we said almost in unison. "Excellent, boys. Happy to do business with you. You can start tomorrow. I just have to work out a few things with the other crew, and you guys will be in business. Come by bright and early tomorrow, say 6 a.m., and we can go over the particulars." We arrived early the next day as requested. I was still feeling groggy, and I hammered back an energy drink before stepping out of the van. Jake seemed oddly energized and leapt out as soon as we arrived, nearly tripping as we went. Mr. Mayhew was there waiting for us. He looked disturbed by something and was kneeling down with a tape measure and shaking his head. There was an odd patch of what looked like dark paint that was on the ground near the white ring. As we approached, I heard him mumbling something in frustration about an artistic B-word. I cleared my throat to get his attention and called out, "Hey, Mr. Mayhew. Good morning." He looked up and the look of concern vanished, replaced by his practiced businessman smile. "Hey, boys, thanks for coming. All right, so down to business. I'm going to go over a few things, so please save your questions for the end. I need you all to listen and remember these things." All right, we both agreed and Mayhew continued. You'll be spending most of your shift painting, not some normal painting job. Try and think of this as having a moving target. For a little backstory on how we got here a long time ago, we had a vendor here. She claimed she was an artist, but she was really more of a witch. I know it sounds crazy, but it's the God's honest truth. She caused a lot of trouble. Eventually, she cursed the whole place when things changed in a way she didn't like. At some point, she disappeared. Ever since then, this paint keeps finding its way on the walls, the ceilings, even the floors. He gestured around, and then I noticed the outline of 3 human faces staring down at us from the ceiling. They didn't have features, but the lack of eyes and mouths made them even more unsettling to look at, like those. I pointed up above us, and Mayhew looked up and cried out, "Ah, Jesus Christ!" Yes, like that. "Let's step out of here for now, fellas." We followed him as he rushed out with a look of genuine fear clinging to him as we fled. We moved out into the parking lot, and he let out a wheezing gasp. Sorry about that. Just startled me as all. Anyway, this artist, she has been leaving these paintings, and I've been having folks cover them up every day. They just keep coming back. For a while, I decided to leave it. But then bad things started to happen. Sellers started to leave, calling it unsafe. He spat on the grounds and grimaced. Then people started seeing things and getting hurt. Finally, an incident happened that ended up closing us down. Since then, I hold out hope that something can be done to save the place, but I just can't leave it. That thing, it's not content staying here. Every day, the art creeps a bit closer to the outside, and the details become a little bit clearer. When those details are clear, if you see them, well, something bad happens. Something that is better to cover up. That's why I need you boys and the other cleaners. He cleared his throat and looked troubled. I was trying to digest the crazy story, and so was Jake. Mayhew asserted his confidence again and continued. Whatever this stuff is, it's unsafe. As bad as black mold and just as spreading paint over Annie and all of it that you see, just be careful it don't spread out beyond this circle. Cover that mess up first. He pointed to a line in the lot snaking out from the building. And the most important thing, if you see any faces or outlines like back in that room, cover them up right away. Don't wait. If eyes start to form, or worse, the mouths. He paused again, suppressing a shudder. Well, just cover them up. And don't listen to anyone or anything else besides each other and me. Otherwise, easy as pie, right? You guys do this well, and it looks good after the first day. You can even get a bonus. But I do need you all to sign this contract. I like to offer my people true employment. He held out some papers and Jake scoffed. We are independent contractors first and foremost. The indignance in his voice surprised me, and for a moment I thought it might actually be a deal breaker. Then, Jake chuckled as Mayhew looked dumbstruck. Just yanking your chain. Yeah, bring on the paperwork. Do we get healthcare? Mayhew smiled again and laughed along. Fill out the paperwork and you can be eligible for health coverage, LTD, and life insurance. Mayhew showed us to a small picnic table set up near the outside of the building, and we filled out the paperwork. I saw something odd in the life insurance policy. It indicated that the placeholder beneficiary was Mayhew Industries. It seemed a bit odd, so I asked him about it. Mr. Mayhew, this paper says that the company holds our life insurance policy first. When does that change? Oh, that he said dismissively. It's just standard policy. First 2 weeks, we hold the account and securities until it transfers to your beneficiary. Seemed odd, and I was about to tell Jake to hold off. But I looked over and saw he had finished and was already handing his completed papers back to Mr. Mayhew. I laughed and then finished signing my own. After all, how bad could a painting job be? After it was all settled, Mr. Mayhew showed us to a small storage shed that had dozens, if not hundreds of cans of white paint inside. There were also rollers, pans, brushes, anything a painter might need. This should be good to get you started. Use as much as you need. Thicker coats seem to take longer for that stuff to show through. Have fun, guys, and be careful. I would hate to lose you, too. He walked out to his car, moving in an odd pattern, as if avoiding the path we had taken to get in. I noticed the line of paint that had been there before was gone. Or rather, it had curved off in a new direction, oddly pointing towards the way Mr. Mayhew was leaving. I ignored the eerie sight and asked Jake. Are we worried about that last thing, he said, about losing us too? He shrugged. I don't know, but what I do know is I call not it for painting over the creepy face ceiling. He nearly doubled over laughing and I held my face in my palms. I could already tell this would be as exciting as watching paint dry. We started work quickly. All the supplies were conveniently located, and it was not long before we had covered up the oddly snaking trail of dark paint that had been creeping out of the building with the white cover-up. Not sure what that guy was talking about. This is going great. It's not like this stuff is actively moving. Come on, let's go inside and work on the other rooms. Jake was right. Since Mr. Mayhew didn't care about how careful we were, it was coming along nice and quick. We opened the front door and nearly fell back in unison. There, inside the entryway, which had been a fading white just an hour ago, now showed murals of dozens of people and dozens of empty faces in that streaking black paint. All of them looking at us from the walls, ceiling, and even up from the floor. Okay, so that's not ideal, I mumbled as we observed the impossible change. The new paint glistened and seemed to have an eerie aura, like it had only stopped moving because we had arrived to look at it. Well, Jake exclaimed. Always has to be something, though. At least the old guy was honest with us. Seems we just need to cover this stuff up, or at least do as much as we can, so let's go. Suddenly, he rushed forward with a paint roller in hand and dragged it along the surface of one of the new paintings. I couldn't be sure, but I thought I felt a disturbing sense of pressure build up when he covered the area where the eyes and face of one of the images had been. I was disturbed, but in the moment, I managed the same resolve Jake had. We were there. We had seen crazy stuff before, and we needed the money. I took a deep breath, opened a fresh can of paint and got to work. At the rate we were going, we could get a lot done by the evening and get that bonus. But we were wrong, so wrong. Nearly 10 hours had passed, and only one room looked complete. Jake and I were reluctant to leave the room unattended, since we both suspected that as soon as we did, the insidious black paint would come washing back in to undo all our work. This is crazy, man. What the hell is going on? Some kind of haunting to wreck this guy's resale value? I mean, at least it's us not attacking us, but it just keeps undoing our work. Jake shouted at the wall and kicked a can of paint towards the corner he had just finished. It was already starting to show new black streaks beneath the surface. I know this feels hopeless, but we get paid by the hour, so even without a bonus, the money is still good. Come on, I think the evening shift should be here soon, I said, trying to reassure him. We left our supplies in the hall and walked out to the parking lot. As we neared the exit, we heard a voice shout from outside, "Nathan, where are you? You need to get out of there. It's not safe." Jake and I looked at each other, confused. We exited the building and saw a truck parked near our van and a man shouting at the building, but not moving past the painted perimeter. "Hey, there's no Nathan here. But are you one of the evening crew here to take over?" I asked him. But he seemed surprised at my assertion and looked confused, then horrified. "No. Oh no. Oh no. No, he brought other people here. God, please tell me you saw Nathan in there. We need to get him out. He has been in there since last night." "Whoa, slow down, dude," Jake said, trying to reassure the panic-stricken man. "We have been painting all day here, and your friend's not inside. We would have seen him. Who are you, and what's going on?" Mayhew said a night shift would be here to take over. The man took a deep breath and spoke in a strained whisper. "My name is Roger. Nathan is my friend and fellow painter. We were hired to paint over the weird art in this building by Mr. Mayhew. That was what we were doing until something happened last night. Nathan did not get out. Something happened and I can't remember." He looked confused and frightened again as he struggled to recall. "I don't know what happened. When I woke up, I was back home. I tried to call Nathan, but he didn't respond. Then I started to remember things. Flashing images, faces, and Nathan staring at a wall with his eyes all messed up. I don't know what is going on, but we need to get him out of there now before we could ask him another question." Roger forgot his apprehension about the paint perimeter and bolted past us, shouting for his friend. "Shall we?" Jake smiled and ran after the screaming painter back into the haunted building to look for his friend. I groaned and then followed him. As soon as we made it into the building, something felt off. The smell of fresh paint was stronger, but it also had a bizarre acrid tinge, like something else was in the air. I looked with disturbed fascination at the areas we had just painted over and saw the black tar-like fluid oozing down the walls. Jake ignored the disturbing sight and rushed ahead, trying to catch up with Roger. I caught up with him around a corner, but Roger was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly there was a shaking in the building's walls, and we retreated back to the front door, fearing a structural collapse. After a tenuous moment, I looked at the front door. There was a snaking line of paint emerging from the ground and merging into an inky black canvas that had erased most of the door's features. It was so much worse, actually seeing the paint move. It was like a living creature, and watching it gave me a terrible headache. Jake was staring at it too, a little too intently. I shoved his shoulder and he blinked and shrugged off the effect. "Let's prop the door open," I suggested. I didn't like the idea of this image forming on the door and being stuck here with it. I pulled at the handles and the door held firm. There was a disturbing squishing sound, and suddenly I fell back, gasping as a living portrait of a face opened its eyes and looked back at me from where the plain door had been. I was horrified, but oddly mesmerized by the shifting patterns in the faces. I knew I shouldn't be looking at it, but how could I not look at something so miraculous? I started leaning closer to the face. I needed to see more. Suddenly, a hand fell on my shoulder, and I was pulled backwards and onto the ground, landing hard and snapping out of my daze. "None of that possession stuff, man. Don't look at the ceiling. Come on, let's try a window or something. This place is screwed, and whatever's happening, I don't want to be stuck here," Jake whispered. I staggered to my feet and shook my head. I almost looked back at the undulating face on the door, and I swear, I felt some invisible hand reaching out to touch my mind. I shuddered and backed away. We found a window, but it was black on the other side. I had a bad feeling about what that implied. Suddenly, Jake was next to me holding a brick he had scavenged from somewhere and readying it. "Here's hoping," he said while hurling it at the glass. I was happy to hear the satisfying sound of shattering glass, but horrified when instead of daylight coming in, waves of black paint began pouring from the window. "Are you kidding me?" Jake shouted in disbelief. "Come on, let's get away from this one. Maybe if we find those other guys, they can tell us what the hell is really going on and how we can get out," I said while moving on. Eventually, we heard something near the west wing and followed the dark holes to it. It sounded like low, muffled gasps of pain, and when we emerged into the room, we saw something horrifying. Roger was there, spelled out and cut open by something. His body was positioned like a morbid statue, and a terrible wound was gouged into his torso, which looked like it had almost disemboweled him. Horrifically, he seemed to still be alive. We approached slowly, and he mumbled a weak groan of agony. "Holy, what happened here?" Jake managed to spit out, and I echoed the sentiment. We got closer, and Roger's eyes finally rolled forward out of the back of his head and faced us. He groaned and mumbled, and we could tell he was trying to speak. "Go. Not safe. Nathan is here, but something else." He fell silent, but his eyes remained open. He was dead. "Oh, hell, man. What happened to him?" Jake asked in a panic. I had no idea either, and was trying to reconcile just what we had seen. We looked around in paranoid confusion when we heard something that terrified us even more than the silence. "Footsteps. Did you bring the insurance?" I asked Jake in a terrified whisper. There was a long pause while I looked at him, and my heart sank. "I did? Yeah. It's just in the van," he said while flashing a pained smile. "Of course," I groaned, not really knowing if having a gun like the insurance would help against sentient paint and whatever things were at work in the building. "Well, come on then. We can't stay here. Let's try and find a way out." Jake nodded, and together we crept out of the room, leaving the bloodied body of Roger behind us. We found another window, and I didn't see any shifting, monstrous visage behind us, so I figured that was a start. I found a large piece of rebar nearby, and I hefted it up. "Nice, man, let's give it a shot." "Crack it open," Jake whispered. I held the bar and swung as hard as I could. Glass shattered, and the darkness behind the glass gave way to a more natural glow of twilight. We could get out this way. I used the bar to clear the glass out of the frame. It was a tight fit, but I figured we could both get out of the building and this lot before Mayhew, and telling him the bad news. Just as the way was clear, and I was pulling myself up and out of the building, I heard footsteps again. I looked down the hall and saw a figure emerging from one of the adjacent rooms. There was a low groaning, creaking sound like the rusty hinge of a door. The terrible sound echoed as the figure walked along in what looked like pain. "Move! Move! Move!" Jake shouted at me, and I hoisted myself up just in time to meet a dark wall of human faces. I sat there straddling the wall and looking in disbelief and horror as the tortured faces of dozens of people stared back at me all as one. They wailed a pained cacophony that nearly ruptured my eardrums. I fell off the windowsill and landed hard, but the pain in my body from landing was secondary to the pain in my ears. The awful sound those monstrous half-faces bellowed stunned me. I stared up dumbly at the broken window as if expecting them to be gone, but the leering faces looked down at me, and I swear they started to laugh. Before I knew what was happening, I could hear again, and I heard Jake shouting at me and hoisting me back to my feet. "Come on, man. Come on." He pulled me up and we started to sprint away from the wall of faces. When I looked back, I saw the figure slowly moving towards us. A faint glow of inky tendrils trailed behind him, covering the walls, floor and ceiling with more of the terrible paint. We rushed on, but the path led to a large double door that was padlocked and barred. "What now?" Jake said, struggling for words and as scared and desperate as I was feeling. My mind was finally recovering, and I noticed we passed 2 doors on our attempted flight from the building. "This way," I told him as we moved reluctantly back towards our pursuer. We ducked into one of the rooms and closed the door just as I heard the awful creaking and groaning sound getting closer. The room was small and had old filing cabinets and 2 busted-down desks. We took cover under one of them and tried to stifle our strained breathing as we waited to see if the thing would follow us in. For several minutes, we sat there in panicked anticipation. As we waited, I saw something in a half-closed drawer. It looked like a small silver locket. I reached into the drawer and it made a slight noise that Jake nearly freaked out about. I shrugged apologetically and removed the locket. I opened it and saw the portraits of 2 young women. I turned it over in my hand and saw that the locket had likely been a gift. There was an engraving which read to Lily, my sister and my muse. "Love, Sam." "What's that?" Jake asked. "Not sure what it is or how it got here, but something about the face in this locket feels weirdly familiar." Jake frowned. "All right, man. Just don't put it on or get possessed by some ghost girl. I'm not dealing with that tonight." I agreed and nearly laughed at the absurdity of our situation. For a moment, I thought it might be safe to leave, that maybe we had given our pursuer the slip. I was about to stand up when the door handle rattled. The door opened with a terrible creak, and we both knew that thing was in the room now. The smell of old paper was replaced by the sickly sweet smell of something rotting, as well as the strong fumes of fresh paint following close behind. I couldn't bring myself to look over the desk. It was in here now. Jake sat next to me, shivering, but trying to stay silent too. His eyes bulged suddenly, and I stole a glance at what he was looking at. It was a snaking tendril of paint that moved past the desk we hid behind and slowly climbed up the adjacent wall. We heard shambling steps in the room and a terrible gasping sound like a person struggling to breathe. Eventually, the paint on the wall began to take shape and form into the silhouette of a face. Jake shook his head and closed his eyes. I knew we shouldn't look, but if we stayed in place we would have no choice but to. I had an idea then. It was a bad idea, but we were in trouble if we didn't do something. As the face began to form, I knew whatever it was would see us, so I leapt forward and put my back to the face to try and cover its eyes. My plan would have worked, but I tripped and stumbled, knocking a small stack of papers over in the effort. I held my breath, but I heard the footsteps getting closer again. I knew the thing was too close. I had to do something. I jumped up and shouted, "Nathan, wait!" The figure stopped moving and stood looking at me. In the dim light I finally saw its features, and it took all my willpower to meet its gaze. It was a person, a middle-aged man, bald and with a thin beard. As for eye color I couldn't tell. All that showed were fathomless black pits of swirling ink that looked just like the sentient paint we had been trying to cover up. Whatever was happening to this place, it seemed to have possessed one of the cleaners, and I had no idea what I was really looking at just then. There was a terrible pause, and I thought I might have made a mistake. I had a feeling it would rush me and envelop Jake and me in the terrible paint. Instead, I heard a choking, a gasping noise, followed by the figure bending over and retching. In the next moment, torrents of the writhing paint left his body. Then, the thing that had once been Nathan looked at me again. It cleared its throat and spoke. "You too? More people Mayhew brought to destroy my work. You can't be allowed to leave. You can't be allowed to do this." The figure lurched forward, and I held up my hands. "Wait, we were just hired to clean the place." The thing reached out its arms, and snakes of paint began to unfurl and reach out. I thought we were dead, but I reached for the trinket I had just found and held it out. "Wait, was this you? Please tell us. Who are we really speaking to?" The thing stared at me for another moment, then at Jake as he silently rose to look at what was happening. "Where did you find that?" it rasped. Oddly, the thing's voice softened after seeing the locket. "Yes, my name was Samantha Gardner. I used to work here selling paintings that my sister Lily and I would make. The people loved our work, and for a long time this was a joyful place. Then Mayhew bought it and started extorting all the vendors. He started raising our rent for no reason, kicking vendors out who had been here for years just because they would not kiss his ass. Worst of all was what he did to the female vendors. The terrible face of the puppet Nathan went slack, and I heard bones crunching as a fist balled up. I shuddered as I considered the entity's anger. After a while, enough of us got together and tried to get him ousted, but he took things to an extreme. He knew I wouldn't let it go. He invited me here to talk it over and try to come to an arrangement. Then he killed me. My sister was horrified. She tried to get the police involved, but they couldn't prove anything. Mayhew ensured it all looked like an accident. I thought it was over. I was dead, but somehow Lily used her paints to bring me back. I don't know how it worked or how I'm here again, but what I do know is I will get Mayhew for what he did to all of us. Hey, ghost man or lady, we only took this as a temp job. Mayhew sucks as far as we are concerned. He didn't tell us any of this. So, do you think you could let us go? We could, I don't know, maybe rough him up for you or something. No need to hurt us, right? Jay asked. The figure paused for a moment as if considering. There was a brief glimmer of hope, but my heart sank when the figure shook its head. "No, I'm sorry. You two are too valuable to me as vessels. The others couldn't leave. This one is too broken. I don't need to trust someone who works for Mayhew when I can just wear them. Don't move. It's less painful if you don't resist." The creature staggered towards us again, arms outstretched, the terrible paint bleeding from its mouth. I pulled Jake away as a gout of black paint sprayed out from the thing and nearly covered him. We recovered quickly and burst out of the room, running away as fast as we could. I looked around as we fled and saw that the walls were covered in more of the paint. It was dripping from the ceiling now, like blood from a wound. We rushed back through the main hall and witnessed a horrifying sight. The walls were lined with more of the black paint. In each surface, the faces of the dead writhed in different states of decay. The sentient paint surged and writhed over everything like a canvas of lost souls. We had to get out, but we knew that thing was still after us. I had another idea. It was a bad one, but we didn't have many options. "Jake, do you have a lighter?" I asked him. "Yeah, man. Why? What's the plan?" He handed it to me. I considered just how crazy the idea was, but resolved to go through with it when I realized what might happen if we waited. Well, if this is like one big painting and the canvas is keeping us in, why not burn our way out? We have gallons of paint thinner in the hall that Mayhew left and a light source. I trailed off, and Jake's look of concern changed to a manic, hopeful smile. "It's crazy, dangerous, and stupid. I love it. Let's go." We sprinted back to the front door, ignoring the terrible wailing coming from the images all around us. We got to the front door and saw the drums of paint thinner nearby. "Throw some," I called out to Jake. He doused the door with paint thinner, splashing it over everywhere since his eyes were closed, and he didn't want to look at the terrible faces that screamed back at him. "Back up," I shouted to him, and he stumbled a few steps back. I opened the lighter, struck a flame, and crossed my fingers. I threw the lighter, and after a moment there was a burst of light as a small fireball flared into life. The stench of burning paint and charred wood was horrible. The faces melted away, then the paint, then parts of the door as the fire spread quickly from surface to surface. Now, we just have to get out of the burning building. I laughed as we saw the smoldering door. Suddenly, a terrible wail echoed through the hole, and we saw the twisting form of Nathan being carried aloft by a small wave of living paint. The puppet thing spoke in the enraged voice of the slain painter. "You pathetic, monstrous savages, what have you done? My work, my life, you will burn it all down. There will be no justice for us all, no future, no more art." I almost felt bad for the rambling spectre until the horrible face contorted in a rectus of hatred and the thing shrieked and charged at us. We had to go. I looked to Jake and he nodded. We both leapt at the burning door, feet outstretched in a synchronized kick. The door smashed open and we stumbled out into the cold night air. We gasped at the fresh air and scrambled away from the burning building. The paint monster continued wailing but could not follow us through the veil of flame. As we watched it burn, we saw the outside tendrils of paint begin to wither and dissipate. Despite the lack of touching flame, should we call 911? Jake asked. I considered it for a moment, then heard the shrieks inside of whatever still lingered. Nah, let it burn for a bit. We sat and watched the inferno for a while before we heard a car approaching and saw it was Mr. Mayhew. He jumped out of his car and his face was pale. No, my building. What happened? He stomped over to us angrily and Jake looked ready to engage, but I held a hand out to stop him and spoke first. So I think a few details were omitted about this project, but I'm guessing we were not supposed to find out before we got turned into demonic meat puppets by the ghost of an artist you murdered. Mayhew looked shocked that I just said it out loud. I followed up and pressed my assertion. And you thought we would die in there like the others? What was the insurance policy you had for Roger and Nathan? Was it a lot? How much was ours? Hopefully, it was on par with whatever you will get for this place burning down. I flashed a sarcastic smile and he fumed. Mayhew looked indignant and started to respond. No, it's not like that. The job needed to be done to keep me. He stopped and corrected quickly. I mean to keep the business safe. The money just helped cover the expenses. It's not my fault they couldn't listen and stay safe. At that point, Jake was done with words, and just as Mayhew was looking smug at his own sense of superiority, Jake punched him hard in the face. The big man staggered and fell down. Jake was about to follow up, but I held him back when I saw Mayhew had drawn a gun on us. He looked up at Jake with a bloody nose and hatred burning in his eyes. I ought to kill you for that, but first responders are probably on the way, and it wouldn't look good for the public. Plus, I think the fire may have contained it. I never thought to try before since I couldn't be sure. Didn't want to let it out, but I think it's gone. He looked around and smiled. So, I will let you leave. But if you so much as say anything about this, I swear I will, I interjected, pulling Jake away from jumping at the man again. Yeah, we won't. Go to hell, you greedy son of a... I pulled Jake away and took a few steps back from Mayhew, who huffed and put his gun away. He mumbled something about lawyers and got back in his car. We just going to let this murderer get away like that? Jake said indignantly. I felt an odd tingling in my pocket and removed the silver locket. I looked at it and smiled. No, it's fine. He can leave, but he won't be escaping justice in time. Jake looked confused as I bent down to collect the small scrap of paper that lay by his feet. I wrapped the paper around the small locket and felt a disturbing sense of energy. I broke into a run and moved quickly up to the Oldsmobile as Mayhew was departing. I slipped the small fragment of paper into the seam of his trunk right before the car sped off. Jake ran up looking confused. What was that? He asked. I held up a hand and pointed to Mayhew as he drove away. I watched with a smile as lines of black paint started emerging from his trunk. Jake saw it too and his eyes went wide. Oh man, that's going to be a fun reunion. I nodded my head silently. Jake and I waited for a bit, then turned back to the van as we heard a crushing sound in the distance, followed by gunshots and a scream. Do you think we could get proper jobs as painters just to try it out? Jake shrugged and chuckled. Nah, something else next. Painting sucks. I'm scared of water. I know what you're probably thinking. You're scared of water, but you swam in the lake at your summer camp. I can assure you I wasn't always afraid to go into the water. My fear stems from my childhood. From a traumatic incident that I've done my best to bury as the years have gone by. But no amount of therapy, self-medication, or soul-searching can erase or make sense of what I experienced. So, this is my attempt at making peace with everything. Whether or not you choose to believe me is up to your discretion. But before you draw your own conclusions about me, about everything, please read to the end. I was 12 years old when I went to spend the summer at Camp Moonflower. It was something that I hadn't done before, but my parents insisted that I spend a few months outdoors with kids my age instead of staying holed up in my room and playing video games. That's how I ended up on a campground surrounded by a bunch of energetic, loud-mouthed kids. Kids that made me feel comfortable with being a wallflower. Those first few days and nights at camp were unexpectedly fun. I did the activities, lip-synced the camp sing-alongs, and acquired a few nasty sunburns along the way. But just as I was truly getting into the spirit of camp, I overheard some of the older kids at lunch one afternoon, talking about Camp Moonflower's lake. I don't remember the exact words verbatim, but here's my best attempt at recalling what I had heard that day. Moonflower Lake. Are you high, John? We're not supposed to go there. John smiled mischievously. Not if anybody finds out we're going there, Billy. Come on, it'll be fun. We'll be out of there before anyone notices. I think he's got a point. I don't know if that's such a good idea. Mikey, don't be such a baby. John scoffed. You don't believe in that curse crap, do you? I watched their eyes dart between one another nervously as John took a monstrous bite of his peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Oh, I see. I'm surrounded by wusses. You can't believe everything you hear. But the kids... Mikey looked over his shoulder to make sure no counselors were nearby before continuing. They drowned, their bodies were never found either. That's what my brother told me, at least. Yeah, it's a bunch of baloney. You can't take your brother's word for everything. John dismissed, wiping the crumbs and remnants of jelly from the corners of his mouth. That lake ain't bottomless. I'm going to prove it to you. Billy gulped. How? Let's go to the lake tonight and see who can get closest to the bottom. Unless all of you are chickens. John teased before drinking the rest of his chocolate milk. What followed next was a fit of arguing and laughter from the group of older kids as I sat nearby, pondering what I had just heard. Was I scared a little? Did I believe what I had heard? Not entirely. There had to be some explanation as to why those kids were never found. After all, a lake couldn't be bottomless, right? Even at a young age, I knew that their little scheme wasn't a good idea, but I wasn't going to be the one to snitch. The last thing I needed was to be labeled as a buzzkill or a tattletale because I stopped kids from being kids. I decided to hold my tongue and told myself that I'd only tag along and watch from afar. Perhaps I could join in on the shenanigans and make a few friends as well. The idea comforted me, and I thought about it the rest of the day with a soft smile. When the sky became alight with stars and everyone had retired for the evening, I snuck out of my cabin quieter than a church mouse. Masked by nightfall, I hurried towards the tree. I felt like a ninja as I snuck across the spongy grass and damp vegetation on my way towards the lake. The group of older kids were already there by the time I arrived, and they were hyping themselves up on the dock. Come on, chickens, let's go. John was the first one to dive into the water. When he came back up, the others followed suit. One by one, they dove into the water, sloshing and splashing about as they had their fun. They took turns going under the water for extended periods of time, trying to outdo one another in an attempt to reach the bottom. However, their efforts proved futile. None of them stayed under very long. Every time they resurfaced, they laughed and admitted they still hadn't reached the bottom. Right as I thought about diving into the lake and joining them, Billy and Mikey got out of the water and began drying themselves off. I was disappointed in my own hesitation. I could have potentially made some new friends had it not been for my perpetual cold feet. But before John could get out of the lake to dry off, he went back under the water. Thinking that he was messing with me, Billy called out from the dock. Really funny, John. Quit yanking our chain, and let's get out of here before we get in trouble. Even from where I was positioned, I could sense that something was off. A few seconds became a few minutes, and there was still no sign of John. I could see Billy and Mikey growing more and more pale with every second that ticked by. Without warning, a body breached the surface and thrashed about frantically in the water. Help! Something's got me. The shrill shriek was the last thing we heard before John was dragged under. Terrified splashing had now become quiet, pulsing ripples in the lake's water as it reflected the moonlight glass. What do we do? Mikey's voice cracked as he looked at Billy for an answer. Billy looked whiter than a bedsheet as he stammered a solution he couldn't get out. I. They gawked at the now still water, hesitant to jump in. Neither of them were doing anything to help John, but I could do something. It was at that moment I made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. I sprinted toward the dock with urgency, desperate to save John from whatever was in the water. My feet thudded against the wood of the dock, the sound alerting Billy and Mikey of my presence. Hey kid, what are you? I never heard the rest of Billy's question as I closed my eyes, but took a deep breath and leapt from the dock. Goosebumps prickled up my arms and legs as I felt the ice-cold water envelop me. The force of crashing into the water nearly knocked the breath out of me, but I opened my eyes against the sting of the water. I couldn't see John. I couldn't see my hands. I couldn't see anything in the dark. With the pressure building in my ears, I swam downwards. Despite my best efforts to navigate the waters, I couldn't tell if I was actually making any progress. It felt like I was swimming in place, a sensation that filled me with dread. The water remained uncomfortably still as I pushed forward. Aside from the throbbing in my ears, the only other sound was the distant echo of joyous laughter. I couldn't pinpoint where exactly it was coming from. I nearly stopped swimming but forced myself to continue. My heart pounded like thunder in my chest, and against my better judgment, I ignored what I heard and kept swimming. The further I went down, the more disoriented I felt. I couldn't tell which way was up or down. At one point, I thought I saw stars beneath me as I searched for John in the vast black water. Slimy strands of seaweed brushed against my skin as I paddled my feet. My lungs were begging for air. I needed to go back to the surface, but I couldn't leave without him. I'd be letting everyone down. Unfortunately, I didn't have a choice in the matter. As I started swimming back up, I felt something brush against my ankle. I thought it was a fish that had bumped into me, but then I became stuck in place. I kicked my foot several times, trying desperately to move from whatever was keeping me trapped. Had I gotten stuck on a log or something? My own question was answered when I was pulled down abruptly with incredible force. A blistering sensation crept across the inside of my chest as bubbles erupted from my throat and shaky columns. With every desperate movement I made to wiggle free, my air supply continued to dwindle. I knew better than to scream, but when I saw what was underneath me, I nearly let one out. I saw children, a dozen of them, all clutching my legs and pulling me down into the murky depths with the giddiness of someone winning a prize. Their translucent skin rippled with the water, and their delighted milk-white eyes gazed into mine as I struggled like a wild bird tangled in a net. No matter how hard I tugged, no matter how hard I kicked, no matter how hard I tried to swim, I couldn't move anywhere but down. Their excited giggling swelled around me the closer I drifted toward their playful smiles. What little adrenaline I had left slowly dissipated, and my surroundings began to spin. My body felt as heavy as an anchor as I descended deeper into the underbelly of the lake. Suddenly, one of the children drifted closer than the others until his face was mere inches from mine. The moment I recognized him, every remaining shred of hope inside of me died. It was John. His soaked hair floated weightlessly around his pale face, as a terrible excitement glistened in his eyes. The children gathered around me in a curious circle, their laughter echoing through the water like a playground during recess. From the looks on their faces, they appeared to be thrilled to finally see me up close. A new friend. The words extinguished every thought in my mind. I couldn't breathe. Tiny, pellucid hands tightened their grip around my legs and dragged me deeper into the endless cold void below. I hadn't thought about death before that night, but the further I sank, the more I dwelled on it. Would it be as dark and cold as the water I was trapped in? Would I see God? Would I see anybody? What was waiting for me? The questions spiraling through my mind were underscored by my slowing heartbeat. The lake around me distorted into blur shapes and broken prisms of light. Somewhere beneath all my fear, a small but traitorous part of me stopped resisting. Maybe dying wouldn't be the worst outcome. if it meant I wouldn't be alone down here. Before I could accept my fate as nothing more than a submerged memory, a powerful force suddenly wrapped itself around my waist and yanked me upward. I don't remember the journey up from the depths. The next thing that I remember happening was coughing and sputtering on the dock. A counselor pressed against my chest and rhythmic pushes, causing my body to spasmodically heave with every burst of water that came up from my throat. The night air grazed my soaked skin. The sensation made me feel like I was at the center of a blizzard. I gasped desperately for breath while my entire body trembled uncontrollably. Above me, red and blue lights danced intermittently across the surroundings as counselors and campgoers alike observed in panicked confusion. Billy was crying nearby and Mikey was shaking his head, refusing to acknowledge what happened as reality. I tried to sit up, but the moment I did, I nearly vomited. I lay on the deck, clutching my head as my ears rang from the sustained pressure I had underwater. After I had somewhat returned to feeling like I could breathe properly again, the police began questioning everyone separately. Counselors wrapped towels around my shoulders and commended me for my bravery. Their words did little to provide me peace or calm, and the line of questioning from the police wasn't helping anything either. I refrained from telling them the truth about what had actually happened to John. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew deep down in my heart that they wouldn't have believed me even if I had told them. That's something I've held on to all these years, and I feel so guilty for not giving anyone answers. A thorough search of the lake was conducted by the police, but news outlets reported that John's body was never found since I was the last person to have presumably seen him alive. I was blamed for his death, but no charges were ever filed against me due to a lack of evidence, and the summer camp was closed for good shortly thereafter. And that leads me to the present day. I rarely sleep and my bedside drawer is overflowing with medication I can't recite or pronounce properly. I can't get the image of John and those children out of my head. The memory of it all still feels excruciatingly real. I've kept in touch with Billy and Mikey since then in some capacity. The last time I spoke to Billy was a couple days ago. He's doing well for himself and providing for his family by being an airplane mechanic somewhere in the Midwest. Mikey has been harder to get a hold of though. He's been busy keeping his multiple businesses afloat in addition to being a father of 4. Sometimes we talk about that night, but I have never gone into detail with them about what I had seen. They still view me as a hero, but I have never felt deserving of that title. I can't help but wonder what would have happened had I been successfully pulled under. Even after writing this down, I don't exactly feel any better, but I at least hope that this provides some closure for John's family and for those who witnessed such a horrific tragedy that night. I'm sorry, John. I wish they would have taken me instead. We're getting a kitty. We're getting a kitty. Jenny sang from the back seat of the car. I looked at her through the rear-view window and smiled before turning a left. The local animal pound was at least a 20-minute drive from our house. My daughter had been singing for 15 of those and had every intention of keeping it up for the remaining 5. In the weeks leading up to this moment, my wife and I had been in many discussions about adopting a cat. She thought that having an animal companion around the house would be beneficial for all of us. For my daughter, taking care of another living being would give her an early lesson in responsibility. For us, it meant free pest control. Where she saw an opportunity, I saw the downsides. Providing for just the 3 of us was already stretching our budget thin. Getting a pet meant another mouth to feed, even if it was just a tiny one. But most importantly, I've never been a cat person. If Jenny didn't pick up her responsibility in feeding their new family member and changing its litter box, it means I would be stuck feeding and cleaning up after an animal I felt little affection for. Unfortunately, I was outnumbered. After a few weeks of pressure from both my wife and daughter, I finally caved. How could I say no to those pigtails? Seeing how giddy Jenny was, I realized whatever money and effort the cat would cost was well worth it. Daddy, can I choose any cat I want? Jenny interrupted her singing to chirp from the back seat. I replied, my attention divided between traffic and coming up with a safe answer. Let's choose one together. Okay. My main concern was getting a critter that could at least earn its keep by catching mice. The answer seemed to satisfy Jenny. She didn't argue, but instead went back to singing, kicking her feet, and looking through the window as the animal shelter came into view. As we entered, we were greeted jovially at the counter by a middle-aged man wearing jeans, work boots, and a polo shirt with the shelter's logo on the chest. The shirt looked like it had seen the inside of a washing machine too many times. The man looked like he'd seen every cat, dog, rabbit, bird, and fish that came through the shelter with his own eyes. He smiled at me and shook my hand, then waved at Jenny. "Good morning and welcome, I'm Gary. How can I help you two today?" Jenny responded before I could. "We're getting a kitty." "Is that so?" Gary asked in the exaggerated tone typical for an adult talking to a child. "Well, I'm sure we can help with that." As he said this, he directed his attention to me, and his tone became more formal, albeit still jovial. "Anything specific you have in mind?" "Well, it's up to her." I said so with a forced enthusiasm that the man picked up on. "I just want something that's not too high maintenance and a good mouser if possible." Gary smiled and nodded. He had tempered his own joviality a bit as he walked over to the door on the right. He swiped the access drop hanging from his belt across the scanner. There was an audible zoom followed by a click as the door unlocked. Gary opened the door and positioned himself next to the opening, extending his arm inside as a gracious motion. "Very well, let's see if we have something that you like." Jenny and I entered with Gary closing the door behind us and following suit. We walked through a grey concrete hallway. The smell of cat litter filled my nostrils and I could hear the distant sounds of dogs barking. We soon reached a junction. To the right is where we keep the cats. Nothing could prepare me for what came next. We rounded the corner. To my left, through a wide window, I could see into a large communal cat room. And sitting in the middle of that cat room, amongst various cats and surrounded by toys, cardboard boxes and scratching posts, was a man wearing a catsuit. I stopped dead in my tracks. "What the?" I cut myself off before saying the last word, mindful of adding yet another swear word to Jenny's vocabulary. My sudden halt almost caused Jerry to bump into me. Looking up in surprise, he followed my gaze to see what I was looking at. "Oh, that's just old Tibbles." I looked at Gary and back at the man in the catsuit again. This Tibbles, had noticed us and was looking back at us with a blank stare. His cat's suit, a full bodysuit that covered everything, but his face, hands, and feet looked cheap, like something you'd order off of a cheap web shop. It was dirty and covered in stains. The man had a narrow face with a messy beard. A few bangs of sweaty, dirty blonde hair escaped the constraints of the suit, where it fitted around his skull. The whole thing was tight-fitting, causing it to clamp tightly around the skin of his face. His hands and bare feet were stained with dirt and ended in long, yellow, cracked nails. He gave Gary and my daughter a blank stare before finally resting his blue, bulging, veiny eyes on mine in a prolonged gaze. Then he placed both hands on the ground and on all fours scuffled towards one of the water trays. He lowered his head towards the tray, opened his mouth, and began lapping up water with a pink, fleshy, all-too-human tongue. I stared at the spectacle, mesmerized. Gary's words echoed in the background, my mind barely registering them. "Tibbles has been with us for a long time. He's a tough old tomcat, been on the streets for a good few years. He looks a bit worse for wear, but he's honestly one of our most well-behaved cats." I snapped back into reality. "Is this some sort of a joke?" I asked, turning to Gary. The initial shock replaced itself with frustration. "If so, I don't think it's very appropriate for children, do you?" Gary, visibly taken aback by my accusation, fumbled for words. "Joke? I'm not sure what you mean, sir." I looked back over my shoulder at the cat room again. Tibbles had finished drinking and was now using his foot to scratch himself behind the ear, a feat of flexibility that was above most people. Jenny, meanwhile, had pressed her face against the glass. I returned my gaze to Gary, who looked at me with raised eyebrows and a blank expression. Everything about him hinted at genuine confusion, not a single sign of some practical joke or malicious intent. Then Jenny spoke the very words I had dreaded hearing. "Daddy, can we take Tibbles home with us?" I spun around. "What? No. No, of course we're not taking that thing home with us." Jenny was visibly startled by my angry outburst. Tears began welling up in her hazel brown eyes. "But I want Tibbles." Gary chimed in again. Sir, I get that he looks a bit rough around the edges, but I can assure you that Tibbles is, like I said, a very well-behaved cat. He's good with kids, very affectionate. He's had all his shots and he's in good health. Well, aside from some scars, fights with alley cats in his past life and all that. I just stared at Gary, lost for words. In the background, Jenny was softly crying. Tibbles was sniffing below the tail of some other cat, and I was stuck between feeling repulsed and feeling like the bad guy. The ride home was horrible. 20 minutes of Jenny crying softly in the background where it had been sunny on the way to the shelter. Dark clouds now loomed overhead as if the heavens were banding together to set the perfect backdrop to our mood. My daughter had wed and then begged to take Tibbles back home with us. Then when she finally realized I wouldn't budge on the matter, she had thrown herself to the floor and started throwing the mother of all tantrums. The attendant, Gary, hadn't helped in the matter. Well, he did offer to let us take a look at some other cats. At no point did he even acknowledge that anything was off. Sweetie, I asked, no reply. Sweetie, I get that you're upset, but we can't just take a strange man home with us. Jenny's tearful eyes didn't meet mine, instead being fixed out of the window as if counting each mile that our journey put between Tibbles and her. Tibbles isn't a man. Tibbles is a kitty, she demanded. I rolled my eyes. I wasn't going to win this battle. When we got home, as soon as I opened the door, Jenny brushed past me and angrily stomped upstairs, slamming the door to her bedroom. Honey, what's wrong? My wife Holly's voice sounded from the living room. I entered to find her on the couch. She just put her show on pause and regarded me quizzically. Where's the cat? And why is Jenny in such a bad mood? I sighed and crashed into the couch next to her. You'll never believe what we went through. As I recited today's events to my wife, her look became more and more incredulous. I couldn't blame her. When I was done, she blankly stared at me for a few seconds before finally mustering a plain, "What? I know it sounds ridiculous." I rested my head against the fabric. Wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't just seen it. That's messed up, Holly finally said. I was glad she believed me. We'd been together long enough for us to know when the other was being serious. Who the hell plays a prank like that on a 6-year-old? Maybe they get off on that kind of stuff, I mumbled, more to myself than to her. Now that I had vented my frustration, I just felt tired. I swear I'm calling them back tomorrow to give them a piece of my mind. Holly nodded along at first and then perked up from the couch. A dead giveaway that an idea had formed in her head. I'm off work tomorrow. How about I go there with Jenny? Throw a fit to that guy's superiors. Gary, you said his name was. I nodded, not having caught up to her plan yet. Holly smiled. If I go full Karen on them, maybe they'll cut us some sort of deal. Get us a free cat or a year's worth of free food, I replied. Are you sure about that? I mean, after all this, would you really want to adopt an animal from a place like that? The next shelter is several towns away, Jenny said. It's at least an hour's drive, and Jenny's still going to want a cat. Why not see if we can use this to our benefit? We get a discount, our daughter gets her cat, and Gary and his creepy friend get the sack, hopefully. I nodded slowly. The idea was beginning to appeal to me. Holly could be an absolute terror if she wanted to, but if anyone deserved that treatment, it was those two sickos. Fine, I said. As long as I don't have to set another foot in that place. The next day, the events at the shelter had become an afterthought. My wife had talked to our daughter last night and had promised they would definitely get a cat today. During breakfast, Jenny was back in high spirits. Seeing a smile back on her face brought a smile to mine. Are we getting Tibbles today? I looked at my wife, who stroked her hair and said, Let's see when we get there. Maybe there are other cats you'd like. I mouthed a thank you to my wife before kissing them both on the forehead and grabbing my coat and heading off to work. That day, I considered telling the story of the fetish freak at the animal shelter to my colleagues at lunch, and I thought better of it. I had a hunch they wouldn't believe me. So, instead, I called Holly. How's work? Her voice sounded from the other side. It's fine. Slow day. How are things over there? Did you stop by the shelter yet? We did. And guess what your wife pulled off? We got our cat for free. You should see them when you get home. He's such a cutie and he's getting along great with Jenny. That's amazing, I said. Was Gary there? Did you give him hell? Nope, he wasn't. I got to talk to the owner. He seemed confused, but he promised he'd look into it. I see. Well, thanks for doing this, sweetheart. I'll see you when I get back. Too bad Gary and his buddy didn't get to deal with my fuming wife. I just have to take solace in imagining the owner putting a royal foot up their butts. The day went on like any other, and as I arrived home after a long day of work, I was expecting the whole situation to be relegated to a weird story I could tell at parties. I walked up to my door, turned the key, opened it, and entered. I was greeted by the smell of lasagna in the oven and my daughter's voice from the living room. "Daddy, come look at our kitty." "I'm coming, sweetie," I said as I hung up my coat and took off my shoes. I then followed Jenny's voice to the living room. I found her kneeling in the corner, her hand stoking the cheap, stained fake fur of Tibbles. Tibbles. The man in the catsuit was lying on his side on our living room floor, eyes closed in enjoyment. "What? Holly!" I yelled. "Holly, come in here." My wife rushed from the kitchen. "What is it? What the hell is this?" I motioned at the man in the catsuit. "Why did you bring that freak home with us?" "Freak?" Holly asked. "We got a cat, just like I said." Just look at how happy Jenny is. Tibbles is my best friend." Jenny chimed in as she wrapped her arms around Tibbles's chest. The sight sickened me. "Jenny, get away from that thing. What's wrong?" "Did something happen at work?" Holly asked. No, nothing happened. It's him. It's the man in the cat suit from yesterday." "No, it's not. It's a cat. It's just a cat." I stood there, mouth agape. Holly looked at me with a concerned expression. Jenny continued petting Tibbles and Tibbles. Tibbles began purring like a man would purr when imitating a cat. He stretched his long, lanky body across the room and rolled onto his back. One of his spindly legs bumped against the standing lamp, almost knocking it over. I noticed something sickening. Back in the animal shelter, it had seemed like Tibble's cat's suit covered his whole body except his face. But now I saw that another opening had been created, one further down his body. Near Tibble's crotch and rear, the fabric had been cut open, revealing his bare buttocks and member, which lay flaccid between his legs, exposed for my daughter to see. Tibbles then noticed me. He rolled over to his stomach and raised himself on all fours. Meow. A deep male voice pitched higher, in order to come closer to a cat's natural cadence. I stood there, frozen as it lumbered over to me and rubbed its dirty, sweaty forehead on my leg. "Look, Daddy," Jenny said. "Tibbles likes you." I need a moment," I said as I brushed past them. I rushed up the stairs into my office and closed the door behind me. I felt nauseous. What was happening here? Why couldn't they see? Was this some sort of sick prank at my expense? It seemed unlikely. There was no way Holly would go this far, and even involve our daughter in some messed-up jest. I took out my phone. I considered calling the police. But first, I called Frank. Frank had been my best friend since high school. We played football together, went to the same college, and stayed thick as thieves ever since. We'd been each other's best man at our respective weddings. And while Holly was my life partner, there were certain areas in life where the only one who understood a man was another man, where you needed a brother more than you needed a wife. Frank was like that brother. And of course, he didn't pick up right away. He was probably having dinner with his family. I called him again, hoping he'd get the message that it was urgent. Thankfully, he did. "What's up?" I heard his familiar voice on the other side. "Frank, listen, man. I'm in a situation and I just need someone to verify that I'm not losing my mind. Can this wait for 10 minutes? We're having my folks over for dinner. And no, it can't wait. There's this sick guy in a catsuit and he's with my daughter." "And hold up," Frank interrupted me. In the background, I heard the sound of wood scraping against tiles followed by footsteps. "Catsuit, what are you on about? For the second time in only 2 days." I struggled to explain a scenario too bizarre for words. Only this time I needed to be fast with it. I didn't want to leave my daughter alone with that weirdo for any longer than I had to. So I skimmed over most details, getting the point across as quickly as possible and with the bare minimum of information. "And now this guy is down there with Holly and Jenny?" Frank asked. "Yes," I said. "And they're both acting like nothing is wrong." "Dude, you should call the police," Frank said. "And before you do, send me a photo for evidence in case the guy makes a run for it." "All right, will do." I thanked him and hung up. I had been pacing across my office, focused on finding the right words to describe what was happening. Doing so, I hadn't noticed things had gone quiet downstairs. Had something happened? Was the guy in the catsuit gone, or had something worse transpired? Fearing the worst, I put my phone away and walked out of my office. I walked out of the hallway and took a left towards the stairs. "Holly," I yelled out. "Jenny, we're downstairs, Daddy." Jenny responded. I sighed in relief. "Where's that? Where's Tibbles?" I called down. "He's upstairs, Daddy. We put the litter box in the spare room next to your office." I froze. A cold chill ran down my spine. I slowly turned around. The hallway was dark. I hadn't turned on any of the hallway lights when I went to my office earlier. From where I was standing, my office was to the right. Next to it, at the end of the hallway opposite to the stairs, was a spare room that we used for storage. And in the dim afternoon twilight I could see two eyes staring at me. Two eyes which belonged to a hulking figure squatting over a litter box. We stood there as if frozen in time. Me and Tibble staring at each other on all fours. He reached up to my chest. But as he stood there hunched, I realized how tall this guy is. Even when he was not fully upright, our faces were almost at the same height. I estimated that he'd be at least 7 feet tall. He was lanky with long, spindly limbs that stuck out of the sleeves of his catsuit like branches of an old tree. The fabric was stuck tight around his skin where it covered it, accentuating his wiry muscle. And as I looked into his eyes, I noticed that for the first time since I'd looked into them, they seemed fully human. This is difficult to convey in words. It wasn't that he'd previously had yellow eyes with slit pupils. His eyes had always been blue and, for lack of better words, normal. But until now, the expression they had has always been animal-like, simple, with no hint of deeper thought other than their immediate physical needs and instincts. But now, as his eyes bored into mine from the darkness, I swear to God there was purpose, a knowing, malicious intent that told me that the man in the catsuit knew what he was doing and he meant me harm. Thud. With a dull sound, a wet human turd landed in the cat dirt. It lay there out in the open like an insult to the sanctity of our home. Tibbles then hunched forward, leaning on his hands, and walked towards me on all fours, eyes locked on mine. It approached me until we were face to face, or rather face to chest. The reek of stale sweat mixed with dirt and fresh crap filled my nostrils. Tibbles exhaled, and I could smell the coppery scent of old blood on his breath. He looked up at me. Meow. I pulled out my phone, pointed it at Tibbles, and snapped a picture right in its face. "You see this?" I showed him the resulting picture. A bird's-eye perspective of him staring into the camera. Dirty cat's suit and disheveled face recorded for the world to see. "This is evidence. I'm going to call the cops. I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, but it's about to be over." I watched for any sense of recognition. Any hint of anger or fear or any other emotion. Meow. Was I mistaken earlier? Did this thing just have the mind of an animal? Tibbles walked past me, the fake fur of his dirty suit touching the fabric of my jeans, and headed back downstairs. And just then, my phone began buzzing in my hand. Frank's name appeared on the screen. I pressed the accept button and brought the phone to my ear. "Did you get the photo?" I asked. "Yeah, I did. Are you all right, man?" "What?" I replied. "What are you talking about? You sent me a picture of a cat." My whole body went numb, including my arm which held the phone. It dangled loosely beside my body. Phone still in a call. "Hello?" Frank's voice sounded from the device. "Are you there? We're worried about you. If there's anything Anne and I can do for you." I cut the call off. My heart began beating in my chest and I felt like throwing up. Either I was the butt of a sick prank that everyone I knew was in on, or I was legitimately going insane. Neither option sounded very appealing. What if I really was going insane? If so, then what was the point in calling the police? What if they just came over for an officer to tell me that exact sentence? I was beginning to dread that it was just an ordinary cat. "Honey, are you coming down?" I heard Holly from downstairs. Concern sounded in her voice. It was understandable. After all, if she really saw Tibbles as just a normal cat, then to her, my behavior would have been concerning. "Coming?" I called out despondently as I began slowly shambling down the stairs. My mind was drawing a complete blank. I shuffled into the living room, pondering my next move. It took me a moment to register what I was seeing. My daughter and wife were both on the couch, and Tibbles was lying stretched on their laps, his lanky body being large enough that the legs dangled off one end of the couch, and his head leaned against the armrest at the other end. Holly and Jenny were both enthusiastically rubbing his belly as Tibbles rolled and stretched in ecstasy, purring that same purr. He then raised his head and started licking my daughter's face, long wet laps across her cheek as she giggled and called him silly. Well, my wife looked on tenderly as Tibbles' exposed fleshy member flopped near her hand and against her stomach. Something she didn't even notice. Something in me snapped. Frustration, confusion, and panic had turned my mind into a pressure cooker. At that moment, the maximum temperature had been reached. Hotness rose to my head. "That's it," I said in a tone that was so calm it surprised me. I strode into the hallway with big, purposeful steps, wishing that I owned a firearm. But since I didn't, I settled for the heavy iron baseball bat we kept in the umbrella bin, a last resort against potential home invaders. And if anything, this was an invasion. I stomped back into the living room and towards the couch. Tibbles was still resting his greasy, cheap fabric-coated body on my family. I forcefully grabbed the back of his collar and yanked with all my might. Tibbles weighed as much as his height would suggest, but he was caught by surprise. With a flailing of limbs and an angry yowl, he crashed to the floor, kicking over the nearby coffee table with a wild swing of his leg. Then, before he hit the ground, his body twisted and turned and Tibbles landed on his feet. Holly and Jenny were in shock. "What are you doing?" Holly exclaimed. "Daddy, stop! Don't hurt Tibbles," Jenny protested. I ignored both of them. Instead, I loomed over Tibbles, both hands on my bat, which I held overhead. "You stay the hell away from my family, you freak," I said through clenched teeth as I swung the bat at Tibbles. The thing edged backwards, dodging with such reflexes that for a second it was an actual cat. Then it lunged forward, swiping at my leg with its yellow nails, caked with dirt and what I could only assume was blood. Thankfully, it missed. It then looked up to me, raised its head, opened its mouth, and hissed. It exposed its dirty yellow chompers. A thick glow of saliva dripped from his gaping mandard on the carpet. It followed its hiss with a deep, angry growl. Too low for a cat, but too high for a man. I was too angry to be intimidated. I said, "Get out now," I demanded, raising the bat again. Tibbles lunged forward again, lean arm striking forward just as I swung the bat again. Call it foresight, call it dumb luck, but the swing was perfectly timid and connected at the elbow, producing a dull thud. Tibbles reacted by producing a loud-pitched wail. It crawled back towards the wall, cradling its wounded arm. It hissed at me again. Then with a final growl, it turned away from me and into the kitchen. A crashing sound could be heard as he barreled through the unlocked back door. I could hear a skitter of bare-clawed hands and feet on the pavement outside our house, and then it was gone. I exhaled, lowering the bat. A mixture of adrenaline and protective instinct had prevented me from feeling any fear, but now that the immediate threat had passed, I realized that I had just been in very real danger. Still, I felt good. Proud, like a caveman who had just taken down a saber-tooth, like a man who had protected and provided. I turned to my daughter and wife with a smile, expecting some sort of spell to be lifted off of them. They just sat there, jaws agape. Then, like clockwork, they both started. "No, Tibbles!" Jenny shrieked as she got up and ran into the hallway. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Holly said as she rose from the couch and got in my face. I could feel the bat slip from my fingers and fall to the ground. I could hear my daughter run into the streets yelling Tibbles' name. My wife kept yelling at me about how I'd been acting crazy all afternoon and how I had just traumatized our daughter and chased away our cat. I could hardly even register it anymore. They barely sounded like words, just a dull drone. I couldn't even argue anymore. I didn't know if it was the rest of the world or just me, but I knew that one of us had officially gone mad. In the aftermath of that evening, I came to realize my outburst, unreasonable as it was in the eyes of my family, had caused a rift between us. My wife had demanded that I go outside with her and Jenny to look for the man in the catsuit, which I absolutely refused. After she got our daughter back inside, we had one of the biggest and most one-sided arguments we ever had. In her eyes, I was acting like an unhinged lunatic. She told me she wasn't comfortable leaving our daughter in my care, as long as I was such a mess, and that she would take Jenny to stay with her parents while I looked for a therapist. She explicitly told me to seek help or consider the possibility of not seeing her and Jenny for a long time. I was branded a danger to my own daughter, and what could I say in my defense? But honey, Tibbles isn't a cat. It's a man in a cat's suit. What use were words if our experiences were so far apart? After Jenny and Holly left, I'd called in sick to work and had spent most of those days loitering across the house and scouring the internet for anything that could explain my situation, while dodging calls from Frank or my in-laws. I started my search looking for news articles about a man in a cat's suit. When that yielded no results, I began searching for a more supernatural explanation instead. When I was seated at my laptop at 1 in the morning, reading up on shape-shifting demons and esoteric curses, I realized I was avoiding the issue. I needed help. I'd never hallucinated before, not even when I was experimenting in college. I wasn't familiar with any type of mental disorder, not that I knew of at least. But what was more likely? That I was terrorized by an entity masquerading as an ordinary cat, but that appeared to me as a man in the catsuit, or that I was seeing things. I turned off my laptop and went to bed, determined to call a psychiatrist first thing in the morning. I had to face the music. Facing the fact that I apparently had a severe psychological condition was painful, but when I crawled into my cold, empty bed, I was reminded of what truly mattered. I wanted my wife and child back. I rested my head on my pillow and closed my eyes. Fatigue from the last few days flooded over me, and I could feel myself drifting off into sleep. Then I heard a series of scratches from my front door. I shot up, ears peeled. For a moment, all I could hear was the vague sounds of trees outside rustling in the wind and the occasional car a few blocks away. I was about to lie down again when the sound repeated itself. I got up. I snuck into the hallway as quietly as possible. When I arrived at the stairs, I lowered myself and leaned against the wooden railing, sliding quietly across each step, looking through the railing gaps until the front hall leading to the door came into view. Through the matted glass of our front door, I could clearly see the outline of a tall, lanky figure. The scratching became more frantic. I stood there, frozen. I was caught between confronting the problem head-on or heading back upstairs, putting the pillow over my head and hoping whatever was tormenting me, be it physical or psychological, would eventually give up and leave me alone. It was at that moment I lost my footing and tumbled down the stairs. I landed on the floor with a dull thud. I cursed before grabbing the bottom of the railing and pulling myself back up. I winced as I tried putting my weight on my left ankle. A warm, throbbing pain permeated from it, probably a sprain. Realizing that whatever was at the front door must have heard the commotion, I quickly looked up to find the shadow at my front door gone together with the scratching. Feeling more secure, I limped over to the front door. Grabbing the keys from the counter as I passed it, unlocked the door and opened it. I was greeted with a blast of cold night air. An empty neighborhood street stretched out before me. Street lanterns cast their artificial light across the empty pavements and the asphalt between them, across empty parked cars. They were the only source of light. For tonight, there was neither a visible moon nor lights behind the windows of the other houses. The world was asleep, as should I be. But before I could head back inside, I felt the urge to take one step outside and peek around the corner, just in case something was lurking against the outer wall. I placed my bare right foot on the patio, and when my foot touched something warm, fuzzy, and wet, I instantly reeled back in disgust. Not being able to use my left foot for maximum support, I fell back into the hallway. Flat on my butt, I barely registered the pain as I gazed at what I had stepped on. Lying in front of my door, in a pool of fresh blood, was a dead rat. The large, gaping gash on its back indicated that something had sunk its teeth into it and had torn off a large chunk of flesh. Something with a mouth much bigger than a cat's. I stumbled, got up, and slammed the door shut, locking it again. The slam resonated through the house, followed by the click of the lock. I had read about it in horror movies, the feeling of being stalked by an unseen force. A prey animal unable to see its predator, but able to feel its cold eyes leering at it from the dark. Reading it and experiencing it are two different things entirely. I knew for certain there was only so much the human mind could emulate. Tibbles was back. Then the back door creaked open. To this day I curse myself for forgetting to lock it. I knew what was coming. I picked myself up, stumbled towards the umbrella basket, and grabbed the trusty baseball bat I had used earlier. I could hear the slaps of bare feet on kitchen tiles, slow, deliberate steps as a prelude to my reckoning. I accepted the challenge by moving further into the living room, giving myself more space to maneuver. Bat in one hand, keys in the pajama pockets, staring defiantly into the open doorway to the kitchen as Tibbles appeared in the opening. He was standing up right now, a disgusting man, so tall he had to lower his head a little to fit underneath the doorpost. He took one step into the room and stopped. I could see his cheap cat's suit caked in new layers of dirt, grime, and stains of dark liquid. The same type of dark liquid that covered his mouth and lips, and was smeared across his cheek and stained his dirty blonde beard. I could see his limp member hanging between his legs in a grotesque mockery of decency. Worst of all, I could see the purposeful malice in his pale blue eyes, which were fixated on mine, human and animalistic at the same time. He stood still as a statue in the middle of his living room, the stillness of a tiger, ready to pounce. Back for more, I growled defiantly. I knew I had locked myself in with the beast. I knew I couldn't possibly outrun it, not with my sprained ankle, but I didn't need to. Seeing this thing and being reminded of how it put its disgusting paws on my family brought back the rage I felt that evening. I had a feeling I was going to need it. Tibbles moved, a slight bend of the knee to generate force. Then, with predatory purpose, he shot forward, and I was too slow. Tibbles crashed into me, tackling me against the ground and pinning me down with its full weight. The back clanked to the ground outside of my reach. I coughed, air being pressed out of my lungs. I gasped for new air and was immediately greeted by the rank smell of sweat, blood, and decaying breath. Tibbles began growling, a deep rumbling sound like rolling thunder. I tried to push him off, but the thing was too strong and too heavy. It then raised itself up, sitting on top of me. The relief that I felt was short-lived as I saw Tibbles raise its claws. I shielded my face and torso with my arms as he began scratching me with long, dirty yellow nails. They weren't as sharp as a cat's, but they were long, and the force behind them made them dangerous weapons all the same. I gritted my teeth as I felt Tibbles and nails tear through the fabric of my pajamas and then through my skin. I was losing the fight and I had to do something. In a lucky move, I managed to get a hold of Tibbles' wrists, which allowed me to interrupt his scratching at least for now. Tibbles growled, trying to wrestle his arms from my grasp, its pale eyes bulging, face a mask of animalistic fury. Then it managed to wiggle its wrists from my grasp enough to grab my wrists instead. It pinned both my arms to the ground next to me and brought its face down to mine. I could feel its hot breath on my face as our faces practically touched. I knew what came next. I had watched my fair share of nature programs, enough to know how most felines kill. It brought its mouth to my neck and bit down hard. I wanted to cry out in pain, but no sound came out, just a dry wheeze. I could feel warm blood rising in my throat, bubbling up into my mouth until I was filled with a coppery taste. It slipped through the gaps between my teeth. We lay there for a few moments, me, the prey, gurgling, feeling the life drain from me. Tibbles, the predator, using its canines and incisors to crush my throat. It let out another growl. Not a loud, angry, feral growl, but a softer one filled with self-satisfaction as if knowing the battle was already over, and the slightest hint of a chuckle. And then, in a very human display of arrogance, it loosened its grip on my wrists ever so slightly, and it was enough for me to find the last bit of strength in my body and use it to reach for my keys, and jammed the blade into the eye of the man in the catsuit. Tibbles released his jaws and yowled in agony. The pressure on my throat and body was released, and I gasped for air. My body was grateful for whatever snippets I could inhale through my tattered throat and gurgled breaths. I grabbed the open wound with my free hand, feeling warm blood and pain. I pressed the wound closed as best as I could. I crawled back against the counter in the living room. Tibbles was grasping, its bleeding eye socket while thrashing, joweling, and hissing, its flailing limbs knocking over furniture, its nails scratching across the floor. With my free hand, I grasped the counter and pulled myself up, scanning among the flailing limbs and toppled furniture for my one salvation, the bat. I found it lying in the corner. I shuffled over to it, one hand still on my bleeding throat. I picked it up, then I shuffled towards the man in the catsuit. Tibbles was in the corner, clutching its wounded eye. Its shrieks and yowls had subsided into an agonized whimper. I towered over it, bat raised overhead. The man in the catsuit noticed me. He looked up to me, giving me one-eyed glare, filled with as much hate and malice as I had ever witnessed any creature possess. Human or not, I swung the bat against its head. It procured a sickening crack. I raised and swung again and again and again, until it stopped moving, and then a few times more for good measure just to be certain. When I was sure the man in the catsuit was dead, I rested my tired arm and let my weapon slip through my fingers. It landed on the floor with a dull clank. In a daze, I staggered to my phone and called 911. I was hardly able to communicate with the state of my throat, but luckily, the person on the other side of the phone was savvy enough to understand that my gargled words and gurgling, wheezing breaths meant it was urgent. As I heard the sounds of sirens approaching from the distance, I sank to the ground. The fight was over, and my body was slowly beginning to catch up to this fact. I passed out. I wish I could tell you this story ends happily. Unfortunately, you don't go through these sorts of events mentally unscathed. Starting with the physical damage to my throat and vocal cords for the remainder of my life, I can only speak in raspy whispers. When I got by in the hospital, Holly was by my side. I could see she was happy I was okay, but her face also revealed concern. Who could blame her? For years I had been her rock, one of the pillars that held up the stable life we had carved out for ourselves and our child. With everything that happened, that certainly was now taken away from her. The accident that landed me in the hospital was ruled a psychotic episode. It didn't explain my torn throat, but at this point, I knew explaining what really happened would be pointless. Whatever it was that decided to torment me was meant for me and me alone. Of course, they never found Tibbles when they arrived. Just me, unconscious and bleeding, into my living room. After I left the hospital, I was checked into a mental facility. My willingness to accept and go along with any treatment they suggested made me the perfect patient. If Tibbles was really something my mind had created, I wanted it out, and I was willing to try any type of therapy or medication to make it happen. I was fired from the hospital only after a few weeks. I now sit at home feeling slightly groggy from the new medication I've received. My wife is downstairs playing with Jenny. The project of getting our daughter a pet was put on indefinite hold. Getting things to return to normal is taking time. Time, work, and learning to trust my senses again for all three of us. I feel isolated. Coming face to face with terror is bad, but not being able to share my experiences with others and experience comfort from that is even worse. But I'm trying. Bit by bit, day by day, I am getting my family back. I'll do what it takes. I'll take my medication. I'll attend every appointment with my therapist. I'll ignore the dead rats I keep finding in front of the door. Rats with large chunks bitten out of them. Far too large for any normal cat. Before I start, barn cats are known to stray from farmsteads in the summer months. Alright, let's get on to the story. Cornfields are ridiculously terrifying, and I don't care what else you have to say about it. Picture this: a SoCal kid graduates UC Berkeley with master's degree in fine arts. I'm an oil painter and doesn't know what to do with his life. Can't afford to live in LA, so goes off to live with his aunt and uncle for a while. Cute story, right? Well, that aunt and uncle happened to live on a farm in southern Minnesota, also known as Hell on Earth. I thought Minnesota had big cities and deep forests, but this part of the state was flatter than a McDonald's cheeseburger. I knew I'd be living in a farmhouse, but I thought we'd be closer to civilization than we really are. The only bright side was that I arrived there in June, so at least there wasn't any snow. The corn was up to my shins when I walked past the field for the first time. Aunt May, real name by the way, came down the farmhouse steps to meet me and give me a big hug before I could get my bags out of my rotting Toyota. Uncle Bill slowly descended the steps with a smile on his face and a limp in his right leg. He hobbled over to join us while May gushed about how good it was to see me again and inquired exhaustingly about my travels. Uncle Bill offered a massive paw and shook my hand like a dog flogging its limp chew toy, a genuine smile on his face all the while. "Good to see you, bud," was all he offered before May's doing drowned him out. "We've got the guest room all set up for you. Come on inside. You haven't been here since you were real little. Do you remember last time you were here? She asked, grabbing my bags and heading off towards the house without me. I was barely a year old last time I was here, so no, I did not remember. While May trotted off to the house, still asking questions over her shoulder, Uncle Bill patted me on my own shoulder and we followed her at his pace. It's good to have you with us, Bill said. He was resting his hand on my shoulder, and when he took a step would use me as a makeshift crutch to help him along, but he did so gently rather than using his full weight, which I greatly appreciated. It's going to be a busy year, not much rain so far, so I'll need to make sure the fields are irrigated. You don't have to help, you're not here to work. But if you don't see much of me, that's why. But if you need anything, seriously need anything, I'll always make time. All right. Thanks, Uncle Bill, I answered. I detected no hint of Bill or May putting up fronts or facades. They seemed genuinely happy to see me, even though I'd be of absolutely no use to them in their farming endeavors. That evening, as we settled down to supper, Chatty May and Quiet Bill exhibited a surprising intellectual acumen as we talked about the last few years of my life since I had last seen them. My mum, Bill's sister, had been the artsy child of the family. She moved to California with a boyfriend. My father, who subsequently dumped her to escape the backwardness of flyover country. While I had spoken to my extended family on the occasional holiday, I had always imagined them to be simple, eking out a wretched existence beyond the bounds of civilized society. Uncle Bill, however, guarded a sharp mind behind that round, bearded face and small bright eyes, and asked probing meaningful questions in the course of our conversation. Aunt May, perhaps not so forwardly intellectual, listened with enthusiasm to everything I had to say about my art and the dreams I hoped would carry me far away. The anxiety of meeting my aunt and uncle again, for the first time, relaxed, and I felt like I was home. I had to piss that night, but entering the bathroom revealed a toilet on its side, with an array of plumbing utensils scattered around the floor. Uncle Bill informed me that the guest toilet had broken the week before, and he wasn't able to fix it in time, but I was welcome to use the master bathroom downstairs. However, as it was too late in the morning, I wasn't about to disturb a farmer and his wife to use the toilet. Instead, I crept down the staircase and slipped out the back door. Despite summer being in full swing, the June night was cool thanks to the breeze that blew from the west. I approached the cornfield, my only light, the orange sodium lamp that illuminated the driveway from a telephone pole, and prepared to water the crops when I was seized by the sudden cold grip of an ancient fear. I could see silhouetted against the half-moon, the whole landscape spread out in every direction like a scroll unrolled across the earth. The horizon surrounded me, darkness beneath distant stars. Anything could be out here with me. The hairs on my neck prickled as a primal fear from my pre-human ancestors informed me that I was not alone. And that fear spoke true, a pair of eyes in the shin-high corn, then another pair and another. I froze, my heart pounding as a cocktail of cortisol and adrenaline gave form to the creature in the crop. I had no idea what lived out here. Were there wolves in Minnesota? I think so. Bears? No, the eyes are too low to the ground. Mountain lions? Are there mountains in Minnesota? A trembling hand pulled my phone from my pocket and shook it, igniting the flashlight to reveal the monster of my dreams. A stout raccoon and her posy of babies, blinking sleepily at the sharp white light. The critter made no noise but seemed annoyed by the artificial sun blinding her children, so I held it off to the side. The raccoons trundled sleepily onward, completely unflinching at the human presence which the farmstead had accustomed them to over the course of generations, and continued on their nocturnal business. The next morning, looking out over the endless landscape stretching the horizon, I was at once a sheer scale of it all, and also embarrassed at how fearful I had been 10 hours before. The corn concealed no secrets. The farmhouse stood as the only object of note in a sprawling sea of emptiness, so no wonder my mind, so accustomed to bustling cities filled with people and buildings and meaning, had found the need to fill the void with something else, besides with monsters from the periphery of the map. But it was, after all, only us. Uncle Bill worked the fields that summer while I helped Aunt May around the house for half the day and painted in the yard for the other half. I painted the great expanse of nothing that we were marooned in. I painted my uncle's shiny new tractors and his crappy old tractors and machines that I could not recognize. I painted the grizzled tabby barn cat, Kaiser, who refused to let me close, but watched his new visitor with keen and guarded intent from the cover of the many barns and machine sheds that dotted the farmstead grounds. Kaiser was not a trusting creature, though he let May pet him, and I once saw Bill pick him up doingly. I swear I heard the critter purr when he did so. As a rule, however, Kaiser never left the farmstead. He preferred to lurk in the sheds or under the house, and he never ever trespassed close to the cornfields, which grew taller and taller every passing week, in spite of the oppression of the sun. One day, when the sun was beginning its descent, I stood at the boundary of the knee-high corn. Knee-high by the 4th of July was an expectation my uncle's crops had failed to meet, and I heard the unusual sound of the habitually silent Kaiser squawking at me. I searched in vain for the critter until I saw him poking his head out the door of a nearby barn. He ceased his caterwauling when I noticed him. His eyes seemed to look past me into the fields, scanning left to right. I had seen him pose like this before when he hunted, but his ears were pinned back to his head, and his back was arched. Kaiser was not the hunter this evening. "It's all right, buddy," I offered, leaving the field to approach the petite groundskeeper. But the moment I stepped toward him, he retreated into the barn and disappeared. I can't remember seeing Kaiser again after that night. The summer likewise disappeared, sweeping by faster than I had anticipated, and my plans to relax and evaluate my future slipped away with it. I was no closer to solving the future than I had been when I first arrived, and I cursed myself from my ineptitude. When August arrived, my indecision was keeping me up at night, and all the short-form content in the world could instill the little voice in my head that kept prodding me to get my act together. On one such August night, I sighed exasperatedly and tossed my phone to the side when social media let me no solace from myself. With another groan, I heaved myself out of bed and slunk down the farmhouse stairs to piss in the field again. The August nights were far hotter than June had been. The cool western breeze blew instead warm air against my face, and the smell of dusty earth along with it. The corn-burnished bronze against the warm sodium light was taller than me now. The sea had risen to choke out sight of the horizon like the floodwaters of Noah rising against the ark. Stepping beyond the threshold of the farmhouse, that ancient fear fermented again within my bowels, gripping my heart and squeezing it faster, 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 as ice water flushed my veins. I hesitated before taking another step down the farmhouse stairs, but reminded myself of just how alone we were out here. I approached the wall of green, which threatened to choke out the stars, and prepared to lend them water to ward off the heat of summer when my heart suddenly palpitated. Eyes between the stalks, shin high, looking at me. After the first moment of ancient panic, I laughed with relief, remembering the night in June, and many others since that I had seen the little raccoons lazing through the fields about their business. In the 2 months since that day, I had not seen another critter except for Kaiser and the occasional rodent that the cat's aging frame had spared from extinction, an increasingly frequent phenomena as Kaiser's absence grew louder in the closed ecosystem of the farmstead. I squatted down to get closer to the raccoon's height and made that sound people use to attract animals that sounds like kissing and spitting at the same time, offering an empty hand to the eyes. The eyes looked up at me, but their host did not move to approach. It struck me as odd then that only one of the eyes stared back from the void. Had the mama's babies grown up and moved along to their own field somewhere? Or maybe this was not a raccoon at all, but our long-lost groundskeeper. I reached for my phone, but remember that it still lay cozy in bed where I should be right now. "Kaiser," I shouted to the critter, making the sound again. "Come here, buddy." Kaiser was not my buddy, but he was familiar. The eyes refused to move or blink. A burst of warm wind swept over the corn and painted the air with the smell of dust and heat and death. The stench hit me like a slap in the face. I sputtered in surprise at the reek of rotting flesh, like the exhale of a dog that just finished eating a slab of meat, or an unfortunate squirrel which trespassed in its yard. Warm and wet and hot and dead. The eyes did move. They moved up. They moved slowly upward through the corn, up until they were level with my squatting frame. Then to standing height, then to the top of the corn, then higher still, until it looked down on me from over the 8-foot stalks of green. Where were the stars? Primordial fear animated the rational animal that had squatted in the grass with a visitor I did not know. It propelled me back through the yard, back into the farmhouse, back up the stairs to my second-floor bedroom, back under the covers, back into an ancient past when monsters still lived beyond the walls of civilization, and children knew well not to venture into the wild at night. I'm writing this maybe half an hour after these events took place. My heart finally stopped pounding. My limbs finally stopped shaking. I do not know what the hell is out there, but tomorrow I'm done. I'm going to say goodbye to Aunt May and Uncle Bill, and I'm getting on the road as soon as possible. There are eyes at the window.